Hello, my name is Crystal Williams, Chief Human Resources Officer at FLEETCOR. I have the privilege of participating in the Investing and Social Change panel during this year's TAG Technology Summit. During my 17 plus years at FLEETCOR, our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and social justice has grown exponentially. I look forward to sharing some of that evolution during the panel discussion, but for now, let me tell you a little bit about FLEETCOR. We are an S&P 500 global leader in business payments, and our core mission is to provide businesses with a better way to pay their expenses. We simplify the way businesses manage and pay their expenses with a variety of solutions and offerings. Thanks to a team of more than 8,000 employees, we help more than 800,000 companies across more than 100 companies across the globe pay their supplier and employee-related expenses more quickly, efficiently, securely than ever before. Now back to the panel discussion. Starting at the top with our CEO, Ron Clark, FLEETCOR embraces social change and diversity through real action with tangible results. Our goal isn't simply to check a box, but rather we have embarked on a journey to effect long-lasting systemic change. While we are proud of the progress made by us and others in the local fintech community on this very important topic, we still feel we have only just begun. Hopefully you will find the Investing in Social Change panel interesting, and it helps to demonstrate that corporate America does have a role in fostering greater inclusion and belonging, as well as advancing social justice. I am delighted to join my peers on the panel, which is hosted by Stacie Hagan, co-chair, TAG Social Justice and Equity Task Force. Thank you so much.
Welcome everyone to this session on investing in social change. I'm Stacie Hagan. I'm a former Chief HR Officer and Operations Leader, and I now serve as the co-chair for TAG's Social Justice and Equity Task Force. I am joined today by three very impressive leaders who are all working to drive advancements in diversity, equity, and inclusion inside their organizations. Let me introduce them briefly to you. First is Crystal Williams. She is the Chief HR Officer at FLEETCOR. Peter Williams is the Director of Community Strategy and Operations for Atlanta for Blackrock. And Elianna Carlton is a Vice President of HR at Comcast. Thank you all for agreeing to participate in this conversation. So I want us to jump in and use our time on this meaty topic. There is an undeniable call to action today to end systemic racism and discrimination of all forms in our country, so that we can achieve that vision of a socially just society in which all members participate fully and equitably. This is a big problem, a big challenge, a societal challenge, and yet corporations are jumping in to try to answer that call. They're trying to find ways to have a positive impact on social justice, both inside their own organizations, but also beyond those walls. And that's why I'm really excited to have the three of you here today so that we can hear from you and learn from you and your experience as leaders working in the forefront of this movement. So jumping in, let me start by asking each of you to share just a teeny bit more about your background professionally, especially anything that led to this work in social change, and also any highlights of key initiatives that are going on in your company around DE&I today. So let's get started. We'll start with Elianna.
All right, great. Thanks, Stacie, and great to be here on the panel with you and Crystal and Peter on such an important topic. So a little more about my background. Been in human resources for over 19 years and have always had a passion around the diversity and inclusion. And now here, really in the last 14 months, really diving in even deeper in a much more, I would say, even more meaningful way. And so to share a little bit about just what Comcast, our company, is doing, really as a result of the recent activities of 2020. And let me just first say, even before that, as a company and personally have always been invested around diversity and inclusion, and really celebrating the differences and finding the common ground of what we can bring together. But certainly 2020 really did call to action organizations and to really take a stand and a meaningful stand. And so I feel very fortunate to work for a company, a large organization like Comcast, that has resources available and connections to the local communities to really help drive impact and change. And so while it's fantastic to work for a company that is able to put a high dollar amount behind the initiative of $100 million, is very, very impressive. But I think where the rubber meets the road is really what are those programs and those new initiatives that we're doing. And so two that I just wanted to share with the team today is one is called Lift Zones. And so Lift Zones is really where we are working with nonprofit organizations across the country to address the digital inequity to really help further connect the communities that we serve. So right now here in Georgia, we have about 5 Lift Zones. We have many more in the pipeline that will be coming online here by the end of the year. But nationally, our commitment is 1,000 Wi-Fi connected Lift Zones. So really helping individuals that don't have access to the internet to come into local community centers where they will have access to free Wi-Fi. The other is just acknowledging to just what 2020 has brought in terms of the economic impact, in really observing too that, you know, the hardest hit communities have been our people of color communities, especially the difficulties that, you know, a small business has in starting an operation and running an operation. And so aside from, it is a separate grant that we have is our Comcast Rise. And this is representation, investment, strength, and empowerment. And this is really specific for small owned businesses by people of color to really help them get started with marketing and technology support. And so what has been fantastic is we've already here in the greater metro Atlanta area have awarded 77 grants, and we're in our second round. We're here either later this month or early in May, we'll be awarding an additional 100 small business owned grants to really help those small business owners get up on their feet and help them you know, promote their businesses and give them a leg up that they wouldn't have maybe otherwise.
Elianna, thank you. That is awesome example of, first of all, the level of financial investment that we see corporations making, but also using the core capabilities that are the strength of Comcast to say, how do we make a difference to advance equity and access for people? So Peter, let me go to you.
Thanks, Stacie, and it's great to be with you all. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, so Blackrock opened in Atlanta just a couple of years ago. I've actually been with the organization for 14 years, mostly serving many of our clients for much of that time. And over the last couple of years, I've just had the amazing opportunity to serve our community in a community affairs capacity. And so really, you know, when we talk about this important topic, there's 3 areas where we're really focused. The first is economic mobility and workforce development. Obviously, very important to Atlanta, but also very important to an investing firm like Blackrock. The second is racial equity and social justice, which a lot is what we're here to talk about today. And then the last and final is sustainability and climate change. So those are the areas of focus, and that's really what I want to dive in and talk more about today.
Well, I'm glad you're here, Peter. This is exciting to be able to hear from you and those new investments in Atlanta since Blackrock came to Atlanta. That's pretty awesome. But I think also those 3 prongs really highlight just how broad and pervasive these issues of social change really are. So, Crystal,
and what I'm excited,
oh, yeah.
Stacie, one last thing, what I'm excited to is to talk about because Elianna was really bringing some of this stuff to bear, is strategically what companies are doing in these areas, coming from the top down, but also how are we empowering employees at a grassroots level? And then something that I know that we've kind of talked about in preparing for this discussion is the corporation's role in talking about these issues publicly. So just a few things to put out there, but I didn't want to dive too much deeper, and I want to give Crystal some time to introduce.
Well, Peter, we definitely want to circle back to those topics. So I'm glad you gave our listeners a little preview of what's to come here. It's strategic, it's philosophical, but it's also tactical and in the everyday work we do. So Crystal, let me welcome you.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here. We are here at, well, how I got involved is I am the only female, I am the only minority at the top of the house here at FLEETCOR. And starting with kind of the Me Too movement, and then with the killing of George Floyd last year, I was talking with the CEO of our company, and he said, "Can you believe all these things are happening?" And I said, "Absolutely." He said, "What do you mean?" And we got to talking about how very differently we experience everyday life, because he is a white man and I am obviously not that. And we talked a bit about, you know, how I have to tell my children, I have two boys who are, well, they're men now, 20 years old and 23 years old, and how I have to counsel them of how to drive their cars, how to walk down the sidewalk, how to shop at a store. And he started listening to these stories and said, "You, me, need to do something about this at FLEETCOR." I knew there were still issues. I didn't understand it was so systemic. So that is what we are focused on. We are focused on awareness and education as our first prong. The second prong is the grassroots efforts that Peter mentioned, by having some employees who sit on various boards. We have one of our executive who sits on the Boys and Girls Club board, and we support and sponsor them to kind of get early interventions going. Obviously, our efforts will expand as we get going on this, but we are really 8 months into our efforts.
Thank you, Crystal. Just the personal story reminds me of so many conversations I've had in the last year with leaders inside organizations who have talked about engaging in listening sessions with employees and team members, and being struck by the number of personal examples and stories that came across, that it was eye-opening, to put it mildly.
Yes.
And so that sort of leads to another question that I have. I have watched changes in companies over the last year. I mean, yes, we've been dealing with a pandemic, but if we take the killing of George Floyd as a starting point and the social unrest that erupted in our country.
And in our city.
And in our city. Yes, that's right. We see companies doubling down and making more of an investment. Now, to be fair, some companies maybe were starting diversity and inclusion programs for the first time. Maybe they were hiring their first D&I leader, but they might have called it something else. But while other more mature companies who maybe had D&I programs for a while were just further expanding those programs and starting to go public with data and metrics about how they're doing with their goals. So as I've watched these things, one of the things I've tried to discern, and I would love to get your perspectives on, is what's fundamentally different about these programs now? Is it, I fear in some cases, just a change in a label and we talk about it more, but maybe we're not doing anything fundamentally differently, or perhaps we have learned some things that help us make changes in these efforts to affect systemic improvements. I'd love to hear your perspective on where we are today and what else we need to do to make sure these aren't just programs that we talk about, but they have a real impact. I'd open that up to any of you who'd like to jump in.
If you don't mind, I'd like to jump in. And first off, Crystal, just hearing you share your personal story, it's powerful and it is moving. And it's not moving in a way that makes you feel good. It's in a way of, and that takes me back to all of the listening sessions, even up to a week or two ago, where we had a listening session in response to the Asian Pacific Islander violence that we have seen experience. And every time I'm in those listening sessions, I learn something new, hear something new, and it takes me personally and my team to say, how do we help our teams continue and our leaders continue to help embrace this social change? Because we do have individuals that don't see it as an issue or their issue, or it doesn't belong in the workplace.
Exactly.
And so last year, certainly, and to your point in your question, Stacie, throughout our company, we've made a commitment, but also within the part of the company where I'm responsible for, which is about 4,500 employees, is how do we ensure that we are really making the workplace a safe environment, a place that our employees, if they can't talk to their family members about what their experiences are, because that was something I recently learned and heard and was just blown away. I mean, there's these constant awareness moments that are coming up because we're doing these listening sessions and have moved into this place of uncomfortableness that is truly different and is not, I know I don't stand alone, is that this is moving, you know, me as an individual, but it's moving me and our company to say, this is different. And this doesn't go away tomorrow. This is not the flavor of the month, the program of the year. This is a journey. And this is something that's going to take a long time, but it starts here and now in these conversations and starting with openness to hear and listen, even for as painful as it is.
If I could jump in, I do think that is part of the difference. Companies have been so focused on the program itself rather than the outcome. And the programs at many, many companies are really, really good. And again, we are very nascent in our journey here. So I admire the efforts that these other companies have done, but it's almost as if it's been in a bubble. And the events over the last year and a half or so have said, you know what, this is not a bubble. We're not in a bubble. There are systemic issues that need addressing. And if we don't help address those systemic issues, we have to understand these systemic issues. And it's everything. It's from housing to healthcare to loans to just everything. Not only entry into the workforce and being promoted in as once you get into the workforce, it's just everything. And until last year, I don't think companies really realized that. They said, well, you know, we hire, we have good representation, we're good. We're going to pat ourselves on the back, we're good. And yes, that is a fantastic step because some companies are not good. However, we need more. We need companies to stand up and say, we will help make systemic change where we have systemic issues.
I just want to pull out two things that both you, Crystal, and Elianna just shared that I just thought was brilliant. One, we're getting more comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I think that conversation, it's got to continue because it's critically important. And the second thing, Crystal, you said it's not just internal. Like we've been talking about building inclusive cultures forever, as long as I can remember. However, we need to break down the physical barriers between our workplace culture and the community around us, because it does involve all of these different things like housing, like workforce. And that leads me to, like, I think I'm hoping the three big areas for the biggest change, and what I'm hopeful to see, just given some of the early steps that have taken place in recent months, is one, and I think you both made this point, education. We just can't stop. We have to do more to educate. And that's bringing in fresh perspectives into that education.
And Peter, can
Two,
I interrupt you one
yeah,
second?
please.
The education, I believe, needs to be a little bit different than it's been in the past. Let me send you to this unconscious bias course. Great, great,
Yeah.
great. I
Yeah.
think the listening sessions that you both have mentioned are quite impactful when you hear firsthand what someone
Yes.
has gone through. So
Those
sorry to interrupt.
experiences. No, I mean, those experiences are, I mean, that's what really brings this stuff to life. It's not just what's on a slide and learning what the definition of a microaggression is, right?
Exactly.
And two, I think we're seeing this at Blackrock, and I'm hoping we'll see it more at Blackrock and more other places, is driving greater accountability.
Yes.
Like, I'm sorry, we have to stop protecting individuals that continue exhibiting bad behavior. We've got to drive greater accountability and hold ourselves, our leaders, and people at all levels accountable, and that there are consequences. And then three, and I know that I don't want to beat Stacie to the punch, but it's really about, like, there's greater public dialogue happening, and I'm hoping that that is going to drive greater change.
Yes.
This public dialogue, and like we saw it in the New York Times today on voter rights, hundreds and hundreds of CEOs, proud to say Larry Fink from BlackRock was one of them, and the New York Times is standing up for voting rights. And there's certain legislatures that think that corporations should stay out of these issues, and that's just wrong. So that public dialogue is critically important.
So let's take that lead, Peter, and let's talk about that issue for a minute, because I think you all have raised in your comments that just the pervasive nature of these issues. When we think about, it's not internally in an organization, a program, it is the culture. I often describe organizational culture as like water to fish. You swim in it every day and it affects everything that you do. So you really have to look at every aspect of culture and policies and procedures, but then taking it, as you all are speaking, outside of the organization, and to how can companies have an impact on a problem that is so big and so pervasive? So right now, we see right here in Georgia, we are in the center of a lot of national news about changes in voting laws. And as Peter was stating, we've had some of our largest companies here go publicly on the record about their position in opposing any laws that restrict voter access. And those companies, frankly, and Peter, your company today and others have stepped into that ring. They get criticism for both making a statement and for also not doing enough. So this isn't an easy decision to make. And without getting into the specifics of voting laws, which we see these proposals across the country in numerous states, but stepping back, what is the role of corporations in societal change? How much can they do? Should they do? Where's their voice? Tell me, as leaders working on this, how you think about the role of corporations in driving social change.
I mean, I'll just jump in because I feel very passionate about this topic. Listen, like Blackrock, I'm just going to use my own employer as an example. We're not in the business of public policy. We're not in the business of voter machines and understanding how that process should and does work. But we are in the business of standing up for all stakeholders of Blackrock. That includes 16,500 employees. That includes the tens of millions of people that we invest their retirement funds on. That includes, millions of shareholders, et cetera. So even though I would never represent Blackrock and comment on local legislation, but what I will comment on and what BlackRock should be standing up for is the constitutional right to vote. and the fact that we should be enabling and empowering every human being in the United States and beyond to exercise that right to vote. And so, sure, we're going to get criticism for not meddling in local politics, but guess what? We all have busy days and busy calendars and children and pets and all of these things going on during this crazy time that we're living in. But I don't have time to read thousands of pages of voter laws in the state of Georgia and fully understand the 100-page bill that was passed into law. But what I can say is that if there's anything that's discriminating against people or restricting the ability for people to access a voting booth or a voting machine or a voter drop box, that's an issue. And we will stand up and make sure that we're supporting organizations and efforts in our local communities to ensure that people have that right.
And I think we see that with your company's leadership and other companies' leadership stepping up and taking that position very, very publicly. It's interesting to me when I think about the major institutions, industry is one of them, government is one, the family, if you will. Oftentimes one steps in when others seem to be letting us down. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
I too think that there's a role for corporate America to play in these issues. We have taken a more internal approach by offering paid time off to go vote, to make sure that our employees are able to exercise their constitutional rights. Years ago, we gave a couple of hours off. And now as, the polls are getting more crowded and COVID and everything else, we gave off full days for every single election that there was for employees to go exercise their rights. We helped publicize where people could go in their districts, et cetera. So we too don't see ourselves, changing legislation, but we will certainly react to it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And Elianna, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, our company certainly is certainly for voters' rights and encouraging. What we found ourselves last year doing differently than years past was providing more awareness around where to go, not influencing. We don't care who you're voting for, just go and do it. And here's links to information,
100%.
Learning how to vote and what to do. So I think it is, and what Crystal and Peter touched on, it's when, or maybe Stacie, you did, when others are failing, I think it is now becoming almost a business imperative that corporate organizations are stepping in and helping citizens, our Americans, figure out how do we help in this environment and this change. So it just has now really become just, I think, the way of the future. And I'm glad, because quite frankly, there is so much divisiveness, and not to go political, but I think we have to address the fact that politically our nation is divided. There's people, at extremes, there's those in the middle. And at the end of the day, we need to find common ground and do what is right for humankind, human beings. How do we help the way forward? It should not matter what my political beliefs are versus Crystal's versus Peter. We care about people, we care about this country, and how do we help find the common ground to help move it forward? That's what our employees are looking to us to do. That's where I think the corporate responsibility is coming in, and organizations are stepping up to the plate and filling that void.
Thank you, Elianna. I think one of the things you're pointing out is the drivers of change are shifting from morally, it's the right thing to do, to more of a business imperative and frankly a demand of our customers and our employees to take action. And I want to go back. So one of the things I love and makes me crazy sometimes in dealing with difficult challenges like this is I love to talk about the commitment and the belief system, because that's where the passion comes from. But then I quickly also want to understand the tactical. What are we going to do? And I know that we have listeners to this session today who are thinking about what they can do in their own organizations. And that drives me to a question around metrics that I'd like to explore a little bit with you guys. We've seen that there's a shift happening in metrics. In any company right now, we measure what matters, right? So if this matters, we should be measuring it. And most companies that have developed to a certain stage do have metrics around diversity and some metrics around inclusion in their workforce. But until recently, they kept them pretty close to the vest, if you will. And due to investor demand and all the public unrest of the last year, the SEC now requires public companies or invites them to share diversity and inclusion metrics that are material to their operations as a company. And so as a result, many more companies are sharing this, but everybody shares something different and some are still quiet. So this challenge of setting targets is hard, of knowing what to measure and what to share. How do you as leaders deal with these kinds of questions? What do you see as the future of diversity metrics disclosure for companies?
In the public sector, we're a publicly traded company. It is becoming more and more and more important. The SEC flat out said that ESG, environmental, social, and governance, are going to continue to become more and more and more important. Last year, we published our inaugural ESG report, where diversity was a portion of the report. This year, for the first time, we talked about our diversity, inclusion, and belonging efforts in our annual report, as well as our proxy, which will be published very soon here. I think we file on the 27th. So, the governmental oversight for public companies is one driving factor that's going to make companies become much more transparent with their metrics. We are a global company and we have offices in the UK, and the UK is now requiring that every company that's in the UK publish a report on gender pay equity. And let me tell you, it is a scary thing when you look at your results and figure out that you're going to have to put them out there on your website for anyone who wants to see it. Trust me when I tell you that drives action, that drives outcomes. Instead of just saying, okay, yes, we have a program that's centered around pay equity and we're going to move ourselves along at some sort of clip. When you have to put it down on paper for everybody else to see, that pace picks up. And I think that another driving factor around transparency is the talent pool. Many of our existing employees, as well as candidates who come and interview, ask point blank, how many women and or minorities are on your board? What's the plan to have more? When do you think that that's going to happen? Same question for upper management, same question for middle management, same question for promotion rates. Are the promotion rates the same for non-minorities and minorities, the same for men and women? We want to know these things, and if the answers aren't satisfactory, we're not coming, or we may leave to go to another company. So as the metrics as the demand for more transparency continues, I think that it will drive action as opposed to being the outcome of itself. Oh yes, we're measuring, let me report. I think the metrics, because we have to be transparent about it, we will look at our metrics a little bit differently, which will drive to actual outcomes of not only behavior, but change within an organization.
Absolutely. Thank you. Elianna, were you going to add?
I was just going to comment, Crystal, you said that so well, that I think what I would just add is, I think we got to be mindful that our employees currently and even future employees will be looking at that information to really make those hiring decisions. So to your point, these metrics are going to drive change. and outcomes in a very meaningful way that's different than the past. But now, as we see, employees that are looking at our companies to come and work for, what do you stand for? What is your social responsibility? How are you addressing, sustainability? I mean, the question that the next generation is expecting is mind blowing. It takes me, I'm like, wow, this is such a sharp. So we're in a place where these metrics are just going to become more of the way we do business, and companies have to get comfortable in this place of uncomfortableness around disclosing and addressing. And it's going to, I think, cost some, significant investments that maybe they weren't ready or willing to do. I know in our company, we are always looking at it and making changes and adjustments and taking action where appropriate.
All excellent points about the drivers and the expectation to show me the data behind the position statement, right?
Yep.
And see how it really works. We only have a few minutes left. This has been such an interesting conversation. I think we've covered everything from the difficulty of some of the personal stories and trauma that we've seen and heard about, especially in the last year, as we've listened more. We've talked about the systemic changes that are needed inside and outside of companies, and this component of accountability and the tactical work that we do to drive change. I would like to just give each one of you a chance to share any final comment or closing message that you feel like we didn't get to touch on enough today that is important for our listeners as they think about how they can affect social change and improve their organization's efforts as well. And let me just go to Peter. I'll start with you. Any final comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, and we didn't, we touched on a lot, I think at the strategic sort of corporate level about a lot of the work that we're doing. I think I would just add the importance of the grassroots level or the employee engagement level. I don't think we can underestimate, and my call to action for my team and the challenge that I would put out to all organizational leaders that are listening to this session is really start to tap into your people's personal passions and interests. And by empowering them to take action and to get out into their communities, give them the resources, the bandwidth, the ability to lead in these areas. Because I think when you see what organizations that are really driving change and the intersection and overlap with your employees' personal interests and passions and what's important to their families and friends and loved ones, that's how you really start to drive real outcomes, is when you're able to line those things up. And I think those intersection points are critical. And I think what you'll see in the long run is you'll start to see returns for your business and greater employee engagement, greater employee satisfaction, and just greater outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you. Elianna?
Yes, so I love what Peter just shared. I have kind of more of a simplistic and probably going to more of the employee engagement and grassroots effort. And it was something, because I learned so much in talking with our employees, is in one of our listening sessions last year, one of the employees had shared his personal story that was very moving. And that's not my story to share, but what his takeaway was, what he shared is, if we can just all take the action and understand that we're on a journey, and each one teach one, and take this as an opportunity, as this is big. This is not going to be solved tomorrow. It's not going to be solved. I'd like to think it's going to be solved in 5 years, but the reality is this is a journey, and it will require us acknowledging milestones along the way. But this is a long-term investment. When we're talking about systemic change, this takes a long time to do. So not to lose, faith or energy in that, but this just that mindset of each day is an opportunity, each one to teach one, is something that just resonated and has stuck with me, that I heard from one of our frontline employees in a session. So that's my parting thought that I would just share with the group today.
That's great advice. Thank you, Elianna. And Crystal, how about you?
Yes, I was just going to say that both Peter and Eliana's comments were spot on. I think the only thing I might add is that it requires all of us. It is not an us versus them. It's not a someone else's problem. It is all of our responsibility to do something, be an ally, take charge of an issue and fix it, whatever it may be. We all have a role, and without all of us, we will make less progress.
Perfect. Start with me, right? What can I do?
Exactly.
Listen, I want to thank you all for being here, really for sharing your passion and commitment to this work for social justice, but also for having the courage to get on a panel like this and speak authentically, because we're all in a process of trying to make it better and learn from one another. So thank you for sharing so openly your perspectives. I'd also like to thank the GTS participants who logged into this session for caring enough to do that. And I hope you found some useful takeaways that will inspire you and that you can apply. And finally, as a co-chair of the Social Justice and Equity Task Force for TAG, I want to assure you that TAG is committed to doing our part to advance social justice across our state and ensure equitable opportunities for advancement for everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Enjoy the conference. Thanks.